Men are moved by two levers only, fear and self-interest. Napoleon Bonaparte, they tell you hard work guarantees success. They lie. The world isn't fair, it's a rigged game. Some players know the rules, most are pawns. You've been taught to be a pawn. We're here to teach you the rules. The brutal consensus is the unspoken agreement successful men operate by. It's the code they live by while you're kept in the dark, believing in comforting fairy tales. This isn't about talent or effort. It's about understanding how power truly works, how decisions are made behind closed doors, and how the world rewards those who play the game, not those who simply show up. Forget everything you think you know about meritocracy. The system is designed to keep you chasing a carrot on a stick. The brutal consensus acknowledges the uncomfortable reality that connections, influence, and ruthless strategy often outweigh raw skill. It's about recognizing the power dynamics at play, understanding the motivations of others, and leveraging that knowledge to your advantage. The world doesn't reward the naive or the idealistic. It rewards the cunning and the decisive. Your good intentions mean nothing if you're outmaneuvered by someone with a sharper understanding of the game. This isn't about being evil, it's about being realistic. It's about seeing the world as it is, not as you wish it were. It's about accepting that some people will always have an unfair advantage and figuring out how to navigate that reality. While others are busy patting themselves on the back for their supposed morality, you'll be building a foundation for genuine success. The consensus understands that vulnerability is a liability. The world doesn't care about your feelings. It cares about your ability to deliver results. The brutal consensus isn't about becoming a sociopath. It's about mastering your emotions and using them strategically. It's about understanding when to show empathy and when to be ruthless. It's about recognizing that sentimentality can be a weakness in a world that rewards cold calculation. They tell you to be yourself. That's terrible advice. Be the version of yourself that wins. The brutal consensus knows that self-improvement is a constant process, a never-ending quest to refine your skills, expand your knowledge, and become a more effective operator. The person you are today is not the person you need to be tomorrow. The world is constantly evolving and you must adapt to survive. This means confronting your weaknesses, challenging your assumptions, and embracing uncomfortable truths about yourself. The brutal consensus is not a comfortable path. It requires a willingness to challenge the status quo, to question authority, and to reject the lies that society feeds you. It requires a level of self-awareness that most people are unwilling to cultivate. But the rewards are immense: freedom, power, and the ability to shape your own destiny. The brutal consensus teaches you how to think critically, how to analyze situations objectively, and how to make decisions based on logic rather than emotion. It teaches you how to see through the propaganda and manipulation that surrounds you, and how to form your own independent judgment. The brutal consensus understands that the human mind is a battleground, a constant tug-of-war between instinct and reason, emotion and logic. Most people are slaves to their emotions, reacting impulsively to external stimuli and internal impulses. They are easily manipulated, their thoughts and actions dictated by fear, desire, and social conditioning. The brutal consensus demands mastery over your own mind. It requires you to observe your thoughts and feelings with detachment, to identify the biases and assumptions that cloud your judgment, and to consciously choose your responses rather than reacting automatically. This is not about suppressing your emotions. It's about understanding them, channeling them, and using them to your advantage. Fear can be a powerful motivator, driving you to take action and overcome obstacles. Anger can fuel your ambition and give you the courage to confront injustice. But these emotions must be controlled, directed, and used strategically. They cannot be allowed to control you. The brutal consensus teaches you to see the world as it is, not as you wish it to be. It exposes the comfortable lies and self-deceptions that most people cling to, revealing the harsh realities of power, competition, and human nature. This can be a painful process, forcing you to confront uncomfortable truths about yourself and the world around you. But it is also liberating, freeing you from the illusions that hold you back and empowering you to take control of your own life. The brutal consensus recognizes that social conditioning is a powerful force, shaping our beliefs, values, and behaviors from a young age. We are taught to conform, to obey authority, and to accept the status quo. We are told that success is about hard work, honesty, and playing by the rules. But the brutal consensus reveals the truth, that the rules are often rigged, that honesty is a liability, and that success requires a willingness to break the mold. It encourages you to question everything, to challenge authority, and to reject the lies that society feeds you. This does not mean becoming a rebel without a cause. It means thinking for yourself, forming your own independent judgment, and refusing to be a sheep in a herd. The brutal consensus understands that human beings are fundamentally self-interested. We are driven by a desire for survival, power, and status. We are constantly competing for resources, attention, and affection. This competition can be brutal, and it often involves deception, manipulation, and even violence. The brutal consensus does not shy away from this reality. It teaches you to recognize the self-interest of others, to anticipate their moves, and to protect yourself from their manipulations. It teaches you to be a shrewd negotiator, a skilled manipulator, and a formidable opponent. But it also teaches you the importance of honor, integrity, and loyalty. These are not weaknesses, they are strengths. They build trust, foster cooperation, and create lasting relationships. The brutal consensus understands that true power comes not from domination but from influence. It teaches you how to persuade others to see things your way, how to inspire them to follow your lead, and how to build alliances that can achieve your goals. This requires empathy, understanding, and the ability to connect with others on a human level. It requires you to see the world from their perspective, to understand their needs and desires, and to offer them something that they value. The brutal consensus is not about being a lone wolf. It's about building a pack, a network of loyal allies who share your vision and support your goals. The brutal consensus recognizes that the world is constantly changing. New technologies emerge, new power structures arise, and new challenges appear. To survive and thrive in this environment, you must be adaptable, flexible, and constantly learning. You must be willing to embrace new ideas, experiment with new strategies, and challenge your own assumptions. The brutal consensus teaches you to be a lifelong student, constantly seeking knowledge and refining your skills. It encourages you to read widely, to travel extensively, and to engage with people from all walks of life. It teaches you to be curious, to be open-minded, and to never stop questioning the world around you. The brutal consensus understands that failure is inevitable. Everyone makes mistakes, everyone experiences setbacks, and everyone faces adversity. The key is not to avoid failure but to learn from it. The brutal consensus teaches you to embrace failure as a learning opportunity, to analyze your mistakes, and to adjust your strategies accordingly. It teaches you to be resilient, to bounce back from setbacks, and to never give up on your goals. The brutal consensus is not a guarantee of success. It is a set of principles, a way of thinking, and a way of life. It requires discipline, dedication, and a willingness to confront uncomfortable truths. But it offers the potential to achieve extraordinary things, to live a life of purpose, and to shape your own destiny. It provides a framework for understanding the world, navigating its complexities, and achieving your full potential. The brutal consensus is not for everyone. It is for those who are willing to challenge the status quo, to question authority, and to reject the lies that society feeds them. It is for those who are willing to embrace discomfort, to confront their weaknesses, and to constantly strive for self-improvement. It is for those who are willing to take responsibility for their own lives and to shape their own destinies. Consider the story of Richard, a young programmer fresh out of college, armed with a degree and a burning desire to make his mark on the tech world. He lands a job at a promising startup, a company brimming with youthful energy and ambitious goals. The initial weeks are exhilarating, filled with late-night coding sessions, collaborative brainstorming, and the intoxicating belief that he's part of something truly groundbreaking. Richard quickly buys into the company's ethos, a carefully cultivated narrative of innovation, disruption, and a shared mission to revolutionize the industry. He works tirelessly, pouring his heart and soul into his projects, fueled by the promise of future success and the validation of his peers. He sacrifices his personal time, neglects his hobbies, and gradually distances himself from friends and family, all in the name of contributing to the collective vision. He believes that by dedicating himself completely to the company, he will not only advance his career, but also be recognized and rewarded for his efforts. The company culture, however, operates on a different set of unspoken rules. While outwardly promoting collaboration and transparency, it subtly fosters a competitive environment where individual achievements are downplayed in favor of collective success. Richard's initial enthusiasm slowly begins to wane as he observes the subtle power dynamics at play. He notices that certain individuals, often those with strong social connections or an ability to navigate office politics, receive preferential treatment and recognition, regardless of their actual contribution. He witnesses talented colleagues being overlooked for promotions, their ideas dismissed or co-opted by others with greater influence. He begins to realize that meritocracy is not the guiding principle he initially believed it to be. As Richard delves deeper into his work, he uncovers a critical flaw in the company's core product, a design flaw that could potentially jeopardize the entire project. He brings his concerns to his superiors, presenting his findings with meticulous detail and proposing a solution that would mitigate the risk. To his dismay, his concerns are dismissed. He is told that addressing the flaw would require significant resources and delay the product launch, a risk that the company is unwilling to take. He is pressured to remain silent, to prioritize the company's short-term goals over the long-term integrity of the product. Richard is now faced with a moral dilemma. He can either succumb to the pressure and remain silent, protecting his job and maintaining his position within the company, or he can stand his ground, risking his career and potentially facing retaliation. He weighs his options, considering the potential consequences of each path. He remembers the sacrifices he has made, the time and energy he has invested, and the dreams he has attached to his career. He also considers his own values, his commitment to integrity, and his responsibility to his colleagues and customers. After much deliberation, Richard decides to speak out. He drafts a detailed report outlining the flaw and its potential consequences, and he shares it with a wider audience within the company, including senior management and key stakeholders. His actions are met with swift and decisive resistance. He is accused of insubordination, of undermining the company's goals, and of damaging morale. He is ostracized by his colleagues, who fear being associated with his dissent. He is subjected to subtle forms of harassment and intimidation, designed to silence him and force him to recant his claims. Despite the pressure, Richard refuses to back down. He believes that he is doing the right thing, that he is acting in the best interests of the company and its customers. He continues to advocate for his solution, even as his position becomes increasingly precarious. In the end, Richard is fired. He is deemed a troublemaker, a liability, and a threat to the company's success. He is escorted from the building, his belongings packed in a box, his dreams shattered. He leaves the company with nothing but his integrity and the knowledge that he stood up for what he believed in. Richard's story is not unique. It is a reflection of the brutal consensus that often prevails in the real world, a consensus that prioritizes short-term gains over long-term sustainability, conformity over dissent, and power over truth. It is a consensus that rewards those who play the game, who navigate the political landscape, and who are willing to compromise their values in order to achieve success. Richard's experience, while painful, provides valuable lessons. It teaches us that the world is not always fair, that meritocracy is often a myth, and that standing up for what is right can come at a significant cost. It teaches us that success is not always measured in material wealth or career advancement, but in the integrity of our actions and the strength of our convictions. It teaches us that the brutal consensus is a powerful force, but it is not invincible. By understanding its dynamics, by recognizing its limitations, and by refusing to be silenced, we can challenge its dominance and create a world where truth and integrity prevail. Richard's fate is sealed not by a lack of talent, nor by a flawed idea, but by his refusal to accept the unwritten rules of the game. He falls into the trap that ensnares so many, the belief that logic and reason will always prevail, that merit will always be recognized, and that truth will always be rewarded. This is a dangerous delusion, a naive fantasy that crumbles against the hard reality of human nature and organizational dynamics. The brutal consensus isn't a grand conspiracy, but a self-reinforcing system of incentives and disincentives that subtly, yet powerfully, shapes behavior. It's the collective agreement, often unspoken, that maintaining the status quo, preserving power, and avoiding conflict are paramount, even at the expense of innovation, ethics, or long-term vision. The trap lies in believing that you can operate outside of this system without consequence, that your individual brilliance or moral superiority will shield you from its reach. The weak fail because they underestimate the power of this consensus. They believe that their ideas, their skills, or their good intentions will be enough to overcome the inertia of the system. They fail to understand that the system is designed to resist change, to protect those who benefit from it, and to marginalize those who challenge it. The brutal consensus thrives on fear. Fear of losing one's job, fear of social ostracism, fear of being labeled a troublemaker, a dissident, or a non-team player. This fear paralyzes individuals, preventing them from speaking out, from challenging the status quo, and from advocating for what they believe is right. The weak succumb to this fear, choosing to remain silent rather than risk the consequences of dissent. They prioritize their own comfort and security over their principles and their values. This silence perpetuates the consensus, reinforcing the idea that conformity is the path to success, and that dissent is a dangerous liability. The trap is sprung when individuals begin to internalize the values of the consensus, when they start to believe that what is good for the company is always good for them, when they sacrifice their own integrity for the sake of career advancement. The brutal consensus is also fueled by a deep-seated human need for belonging and acceptance. We are social creatures, hardwired to seek the approval of our peers and to avoid rejection. This need can be exploited to enforce conformity and suppress dissent. Those who challenge the consensus are often ostracized, excluded from social circles, and denied opportunities for advancement. This social isolation can be devastating, leading to feelings of loneliness, alienation, and despair. The weak crave validation and acceptance, and they are willing to compromise their values in order to obtain it. They conform to the expectations of the group, even when those expectations are unethical or harmful. This desire for belonging reinforces the consensus, creating a culture of conformity where dissent is discouraged and punished. The trap tightens when individuals begin to define themselves by their affiliation with the group, when they lose sight of their own values and beliefs, and when they become mere extensions of the collective will. The brutal consensus is further strengthened by the illusion of objectivity and rationality. Decisions are often presented as being based on data, analysis, and logic, when in reality they are driven by power, politics, and self-interest. The weak are easily fooled by this facade, believing that if they can only present their arguments in a clear and rational manner, they will be able to persuade those in power to see things their way. They fail to recognize that the decision-making process is often rigged, that the data is cherry-picked to support predetermined conclusions, and that the rules of the game are constantly shifting to favor those in control. The trap snaps shut when individuals begin to believe that the system is fair and just, when they accept the narrative that is being presented to them, and when they fail to question the underlying assumptions and biases. The brutal consensus also leverages the power of cognitive biases and psychological manipulation. People are prone to confirmation bias, seeking out information that confirms their existing beliefs and ignoring information that contradicts them. This bias can be exploited to reinforce the consensus by selectively presenting information that supports the status quo and suppressing information that challenges it. People are also susceptible to groupthink, a phenomenon where the desire for harmony and conformity within a group overrides critical thinking and independent judgment. This can lead to disastrous decisions, as individuals suppress their doubts and concerns in order to avoid disrupting the group's consensus. The weak are unaware of these cognitive biases and psychological manipulations, and they are therefore easily manipulated into accepting the consensus. They fail to recognize that their own thoughts and beliefs are being shaped by external forces, and they become unwitting agents of the system. The trap is inescapable when individuals lose the ability to think critically and independently, when they become mere parrots of the prevailing ideology, and when they blindly follow the herd. Ultimately, the trap of the brutal consensus lies in its ability to erode individual agency and moral responsibility. When individuals believe that they are powerless to change the system, when they feel that they have no choice but to conform, they begin to abdicate their own responsibility for their actions. They become mere cogs in the machine, blindly following orders and carrying out tasks without questioning their ethical implications. This erosion of moral responsibility is perhaps the most insidious aspect of the brutal consensus. It allows individuals to justify their complicity in unethical or harmful actions by claiming that they were just following orders or that they were doing what was necessary to survive. The weak surrender their integrity and their autonomy, becoming puppets of the system, driven by fear, greed, and the desperate need for acceptance. The trap is complete when individuals lose all sense of self, when they become mere reflections of the system's values, and when they are willing to sacrifice anything, even their own souls, to maintain their position within the brutal consensus. The strategy to navigate the brutal consensus is not about naive rebellion or futile attempts to dismantle the system from within. It's about understanding its mechanisms, identifying its weaknesses, and exploiting them for your own advancement. Think of it as a game, a ruthless competition where the prize is power, influence, and freedom. The first step is to recognize that the consensus is not monolithic. It's a collection of individuals, each with their own motivations, fears, and vulnerabilities. Some are true believers, deeply invested in the ideology of the system. Others are simply opportunists, seeking to climb the ladder of success by conforming to the prevailing norms. And still others are dissenters, quietly harboring doubts and resentments, waiting for an opportunity to break free. Your goal is to identify these different factions, understand their motivations, and use them to your advantage. Learn to speak their language, mirror their values, and feign allegiance when necessary. Become a chameleon, adapting to different social environments and blending in with the crowd. But never forget your true purpose: to advance your own agenda, to accumulate power, and to ultimately transcend the limitations of the system. The most effective way to manipulate the consensus is to control the narrative. Understand that the consensus is built on stories, on myths, and on carefully crafted narratives that reinforce the status quo. Learn to identify these narratives, deconstruct them, and replace them with your own. Use the tools of propaganda, persuasion, and psychological manipulation to shape public opinion and to influence the behavior of others. Control the flow of information, filter out dissenting voices, and amplify your own message. The brutal consensus thrives on conformity and obedience. To break free from its grip, you must cultivate a spirit of independence and critical thinking. Question everything, challenge assumptions, and refuse to accept the conventional wisdom. Seek out alternative sources of information, engage in independent research, and develop your own unique perspective. Surround yourself with like-minded individuals who share your values and support your goals. Create your own community, your own network of allies, and your own counterculture. One of the most effective ways to undermine the brutal consensus is to expose its hypocrisy and contradictions. Point out the gap between the system's professed values and its actual practices. Highlight the injustices, the inequalities, and the abuses of power that are hidden beneath the surface. Use satire, humor, and irony to ridicule the elites and to expose their corruption. But be careful, be strategic, and be aware of the risks. The system will not hesitate to silence dissenters, to punish those who challenge its authority, and to crush any attempt to disrupt the status quo. The key is to operate from a position of strength, to build a power base that is independent of the system, and to choose your battles wisely. Realize that genuine change rarely comes from direct confrontation. It comes from a slow, gradual process of erosion, of undermining the system's legitimacy, and of creating alternative structures that can eventually replace it. Focus on building your own wealth, your own influence, and your own network of support. Become a master of self-reliance, able to provide for yourself and your family without depending on the system. Invest in your own skills, your own knowledge, and your own personal development. The ultimate goal is not simply to survive within the brutal consensus, but to thrive, to prosper, and to create a life that is truly your own. This requires a combination of cunning, strategy, and unwavering determination. It requires a willingness to play the game, to manipulate the system, and to use its own tools against it. But it also requires a strong moral compass, a clear sense of your own values, and a commitment to building a better future for yourself and for those around you. The Machiavellian approach is not about embracing evil or sacrificing your own integrity. It's about understanding the realities of power, about recognizing the dark forces that shape the world, and about using your knowledge to navigate the treacherous terrain of the brutal consensus. It's about becoming a master strategist, a skilled manipulator, and a ruthless competitor. But it's also about remaining true to yourself, about preserving your own values, and about using your power for good. The brutal consensus is a trap, a prison, and a cage. But it is not an insurmountable obstacle. With the right strategy, the right mindset, and the right tools, you can break free from its grip, achieve your goals, and create a life of freedom, purpose, and power. Consider the rise and fall of empires, those sprawling behemoths built on conquest, sustained by exploitation, and ultimately consumed by their own internal contradictions. Every empire in its ascent faced a brutal consensus, the established order of existing powers, each vying for dominance, each willing to crush any challenge to their supremacy. To rise, the aspiring empire had to understand this consensus, to dissect its weaknesses, to exploit its rivalries, and to build a force capable of shattering the existing power dynamics. This required more than just military might. It demanded a sophisticated understanding of human psychology, an ability to manipulate alliances, to sow discord among enemies, and to project an image of invincibility. The Romans, for example, excelled at this game. They understood the importance of strategic alliances, offering citizenship and protection to those who submitted, while ruthlessly crushing those who resisted. They built a powerful military machine, but they also invested in infrastructure, in law, and in culture, creating a system that attracted and assimilated diverse populations. They were masters of the brutal consensus, not simply by brute force, but by a calculated strategy of carrots and sticks, of rewards and punishments, of inclusion and exclusion. But even the Roman Empire, with its vast resources and its sophisticated political system, eventually succumbed to the forces of decay. Internal corruption, economic instability, and external pressures eroded its foundations. The brutal consensus, once mastered, became a source of weakness, as the empire grew complacent, rigid, and unable to adapt to changing circumstances. The lesson here is clear. The brutal consensus is not a static entity. It is a dynamic, ever-shifting landscape of power, where alliances shift, rivalries intensify, and new threats emerge. To survive and thrive, one must constantly adapt, evolve, and reinvent oneself. One must never become complacent, never assume that past successes guarantee future victories. The empire that fails to adapt is doomed to decline, to be overtaken by more agile, more ruthless, and more innovative competitors. War itself is the ultimate expression of the brutal consensus. It is a zero-sum game, where one side's victory is inevitably the other side's defeat. To win a war, one must understand the enemy's strengths and weaknesses, their motivations and their strategies. One must be willing to use any means necessary to achieve victory, to exploit every advantage, to crush any resistance. War is not a game of honor or fair play. It is a brutal struggle for survival, where the only rule is to win. The great military leaders throughout history, from Alexander the Great to Napoleon Bonaparte, understood this principle. They were masters of strategy, of logistics, of psychology. They knew how to inspire their troops, how to outmaneuver their enemies, and how to exploit the terrain. They were ruthless in their pursuit of victory, willing to sacrifice anything to achieve their goals. But even the most brilliant military strategist cannot guarantee victory. War is inherently unpredictable, subject to chance, to unforeseen circumstances, and to the vagaries of human nature. A single mistake, a single miscalculation can have catastrophic consequences. The Battle of Waterloo, for example, turned on a series of seemingly minor events. A delayed attack, a miscommunication, a sudden downpour. These seemingly insignificant factors combined to derail Napoleon's carefully laid plans and to seal his fate. The lesson here is that even in the most controlled and calculated environments, the element of chance can never be entirely eliminated. One must always be prepared for the unexpected, to adapt to changing circumstances, and to be willing to improvise. One must also be willing to accept defeat, to learn from one's mistakes, and to come back stronger. The brutal consensus of war demands not only strategic brilliance, but also resilience, adaptability, and a willingness to learn from failure. The battlefield exposes weaknesses with brutal honesty. The historical parallel of empires and war offers a valuable lens through which to understand the brutal consensus in our own lives. The principles of power, strategy, and manipulation that apply to empires and to warfare also apply to the struggles we face in our personal and professional lives. Whether we are competing for a promotion, negotiating a deal, or building a business, we are constantly navigating a landscape of power, where our success depends on our ability to understand the rules of the game, to anticipate the actions of our competitors, and to exploit every advantage. Just as empires rise and fall, and just as wars are won and lost, our own lives are filled with successes and failures, with moments of triumph and moments of defeat. The key is to learn from these experiences, to adapt to changing circumstances, and to never give up on our goals. The brutal consensus may seem daunting, even insurmountable, but it is not an invincible force. With the right strategy, the right mindset, and the right tools, we can overcome any obstacle, achieve our goals, and create a life of freedom, purpose, and power. The empires that endured understood the need for constant vigilance, adaptation, and innovation. They invested in their people, in their infrastructure, and in their culture. They were not simply focused on short-term gains, but on long-term sustainability. They understood that power is not an end in itself, but a means to an end, a tool for achieving a greater purpose. Similarly, the individuals who thrive in the brutal consensus are those who are not simply focused on personal gain, but on creating value for others, on building strong relationships, and on contributing to something larger than themselves. They understand that true power comes not from dominating others, but from empowering them. They recognize the importance of integrity, of honesty, and of ethical behavior. They are not simply Machiavellian manipulators, but leaders who inspire trust, loyalty, and respect. The brutal consensus demands not only cunning and strategy, but also character, integrity, and a commitment to serving others. Consider the nature of alliances. Empires rarely rise alone. They forge alliances, often temporary and self-serving, to achieve specific goals. These alliances are based on mutual interests, on shared enemies, and on the promise of mutual benefit. But alliances are also inherently unstable. They can shift, dissolve, and even turn into rivalries. The key to managing alliances is to understand the motivations of your partners, to anticipate their actions, and to be prepared for betrayal. The Roman Empire, for example, was a master of alliance building. They offered citizenship and protection to conquered peoples, creating a vast network of allies who were bound to Rome by mutual self-interest. But the Romans were also ruthless in dealing with betrayal. They crushed rebellions swiftly and decisively, sending a clear message that disloyalty would not be tolerated. The lesson here is that alliances are a valuable tool, but they must be managed carefully and strategically. One must never become overly reliant on allies, and one must always be prepared for the possibility of betrayal. In the context of the brutal consensus, alliances are equally important. Building a strong network of contacts, mentors, and supporters can provide access to resources, opportunities, and information that would otherwise be unavailable. But alliances are also a source of vulnerability. One must be careful about who one trusts, and one must be prepared to cut ties with those who prove to be unreliable or untrustworthy. The brutal consensus demands not only the ability to build alliances, but also the wisdom to manage them effectively. The alliances that endure are built on mutual respect, shared values, and a clear understanding of each other's goals. They are not simply transactional relationships, but genuine partnerships that are based on trust and loyalty. The manipulation of information is another critical element of success in the brutal consensus. Empires and war are both heavily reliant on propaganda, on misinformation, and on psychological warfare. The goal is to control the narrative, to shape public opinion, and to demoralize the enemy. The Romans, for example, used propaganda to portray themselves as benevolent rulers, bringing peace and prosperity to the conquered territories. They also spread rumors and disinformation to sow discord among their enemies. Modern warfare is even more heavily reliant on information warfare. Cyber attacks, social media campaigns, and fake news are all used to manipulate public opinion, to disrupt enemy operations, and to undermine their morale. The brutal consensus demands not only the ability to gather and analyze information, but also the ability to disseminate it effectively. One must be able to craft compelling narratives, to use persuasive language, and to exploit the biases and prejudices of the target audience. But the manipulation of information is a dangerous game. It can easily backfire, leading to mistrust, resentment, and even rebellion. The most effective form of information warfare is not simply to lie or to deceive, but to present the truth in a way that is favorable to one's own interests. This requires a deep understanding of human psychology, a keen sense of timing, and a willingness to take risks. The empires that mastered the art of information warfare were those that were able to control the flow of information, to shape public opinion, and to maintain their credibility. The ability to discern truth from falsehood is critical for navigating the brutal consensus. Ultimately, the brutal consensus is a reflection of human nature. It is a product of our inherent desire for power, our tendency to compete for resources, and our capacity for both good and evil. To understand the brutal consensus is to understand ourselves. It is to recognize our own weaknesses and vulnerabilities, to confront our own biases and prejudices, and to strive to become better, more ethical, and more compassionate human beings. The empires that collapsed were those that lost sight of their values, that became consumed by greed and corruption, and that forgot the importance of serving the common good. The individuals who fail in the brutal consensus are those who are driven by ego, by ambition, and by a desire for personal gain. The path to success in the brutal consensus is not simply to become a ruthless manipulator or a cunning strategist, but to cultivate a strong moral compass, to develop a clear sense of purpose, and to commit to using our power for good. The brutal consensus is a challenge, a test, and an opportunity. It is a challenge to overcome our own limitations, a test of our character and integrity, and an opportunity to create a better world. The empires that endured were those that were built on a foundation of justice, fairness, and equality. The individuals who thrive in the brutal consensus are those who are driven by a desire to make a positive impact on the world, to leave a legacy of good, and to inspire others to do the same. The brutal consensus is not simply a game to be won, but a world to be shaped. And the shape of that world depends on the choices we make, the values we embrace, and the actions we take. The brutal consensus is not about winning, it's about surviving. It's the understanding that your comfort, your safety, and your very existence are contingent on your ability to navigate a world that is fundamentally indifferent to your well-being. This isn't a game with rules, it's a constant negotiation with reality, a reality that is often harsh, unforgiving, and utterly devoid of sentimentality. It is the cold, hard truth that vulnerability is an invitation to be exploited, that weakness is a magnet for predators, and that naivete is a luxury you cannot afford. We are all players in a deadly game, whether we acknowledge it or not. Every interaction, every transaction, every relationship is a potential battleground where power dynamics are constantly shifting and where the stakes can be surprisingly high. The brutal consensus demands that you become acutely aware of these dynamics, that you learn to recognize the subtle cues of dominance and submission, and that you develop the ability to assert yourself without resorting to unnecessary aggression. This is not about becoming a bully, but about cultivating a quiet confidence, a steely resolve that discourages others from taking advantage of you. The world doesn't reward kindness or fairness, it rewards strength and competence. The brutal consensus does not ask you to become heartless, but it does require you to be strategic, to prioritize your own survival without losing sight of your humanity. Because the true masters of the brutal consensus are not those who merely dominate others, but those who can wield power with wisdom and restraint, who can navigate the treacherous currents of human interaction without succumbing to the temptations of cruelty and exploitation. It is a razor's edge, a constant balancing act between self-preservation and ethical conduct. Those who fall off that edge, those who become consumed by greed or hatred, inevitably find themselves facing consequences they never anticipated. The system has a way of correcting itself, of punishing those who abuse their power. The most dangerous delusion is to believe that you are somehow immune to the consequences of your actions. The brutal consensus demands constant vigilance, a willingness to adapt, and a commitment to learning from your mistakes. The world is a classroom, and the lessons are often painful. But those who persevere, those who are willing to confront the harsh realities of human nature, are the ones who ultimately succeed. They are not necessarily the richest or the most powerful, but they are the ones who live with a sense of purpose and integrity, who leave the world a little better than they found it. The brutal consensus is not an excuse for nihilism or cynicism. It is a call to action. It is a reminder that we are all responsible for shaping the world around us, that we have the power to choose our own values and to live by them, even in the face of adversity. The first step is to see the world as it is, not as we wish it would be. To understand the true nature of power, the motivations of others, and the consequences of our own actions. Once we have this understanding, we can begin